Next to me is almost 1,000 horsepower in egg-shaped SUVs, and guess what? They're a total blast. Whether you're hitting the grocery run or your local B road, the G01 platform has an option for you. I'm Alex Nelson, and on today's F-Superhero Buyer's Guide, we're telling you everything you need to know about the G01 X3. Now, what makes the X3 so special in BMW's lineup? Well, it's kind of the sweet spot for a bunch of different reasons. These days, with a huge spread of products from BMW between the X1 all the way up to the X7 and the XM, the X3 still holds its own by thematically being a 3 Series and carrying some of the best engines and the best equipment in the right size package for daily driving use. Being based on the 3 Series, it's not too big, it's easy to park, it has sporty handling without being overly complicated. It has decent luxury and tech, a divide that's getting slimmer and slimmer every single model year between the big boys like the X5 and the X7. And it's always carried some of the purest BMW engines, regardless of whether it has a 4-cylinder or a 6-cylinder. Basically, if you want an SUV without it feeling too big, too bulky, too cumbersome, or too complicated, the X3 is the one to have. Now, with these compromises, there are some downsides, which we'll get into later, and the X3 has almost always been either an early test bed for other models and technologies or a bit of a late arrival. Now, if you were to get an X3, why would you want the G01 specifically, and why is everyone talking about this platform so much? Well, if you've looked at an X5 and looked at an X3 previously, like the prior generation F25, and wished that there was a happy medium in between the two, the G01 is finally the perfect blend in between the OG X5 and last generation's X3. Being 1.6 inches longer and a little bit wider than the original X5, it won't be leaving you bummed out at that IKEA run. On the flip side, the G01 M40i, like the one to my left, makes as much torque as the previous generation V8 X5s. So if you're towing a boat or hitting a B road, you won't hit any snags either. In fact, the base model 30i 4-cylinder X3 with something like a Dynon plug-and-play tuner actually makes the same amount of torque as the outgoing 35i X3. In fact, BMW knows the X3 is such a jack of all trades that this is the very first X3 ever made to be shipped with a factory tow hitch from BMW. Now, I've seen these things towing double-axle race car trailers, horse carriers, you name it. They can pretty much do it all, and without sweating it. Now, I mentioned B-Road. This is one of the first generations of BMW SUV where BMW has gone wholeheartedly performance first. In fact, they even debuted the new X3M with the S58 engine from the M3 before the M3 even launched. All of these cars share McPherson strut front suspension, which keeps them feeling sporty, unlike their bigger brothers as well, and they don't understeer nearly as much as their Mini Cooper-based X1 and X2 relatives. And finally, pricing. You can get into the legendary B58 or S58 straight 6 cars, or even the venerable B48 4-cylinder for a lot less money than you'd think relative to their sedan counterparts. The X3M is frequently priced lower than its G80 M3 counterpart, the X3 M40i cheaper than the M340i sedan, and the 30i X3 carries a lot more value than just getting a 4-cylinder G20 sedan. Now, again, with the G01 generation being the sweet spot of X3, something that's becoming more and more apparent as these cars have evolved is the technology gap between the base model or smaller models that BMW sells, like the X3, and their larger counterparts. Now, the G01 is actually based on the architecture shared between the G30 5 Series and the G12/G11 7 Series. So the X3 for this generation got things like surround view cameras, it can park itself, light carpets when you open the door, heated and cooled seats along with a heated steering wheel, CarPlay, big screens, you name it. They really threw everything at these cars, and especially with the X3M. Gone are the days of having to get an X5 or a bigger car just to get the standard equipment you want, such as keyless entry and CarPlay. These days, even the smaller X3 comes with all the technology you could ever ask for, so long as you get one with the right options equipped from the factory. Now, you know why the G01 is cool and why everyone's talking about it, but what even is a G01 or an F98, F97, F25, or an E83? Well, these are BMW development codes, and for those not familiar with BMW lingo, there is a method to the madness. A BMW G01 describes an X3 built between 2018 and 2024. Like I said, its predecessor was the F25, and the predecessor before that was the E83. Now, I mentioned that the downside of the X3 has typically been it's either an early platform adopter or a bit of a late arrival. These chassis codes aren't just random spreadsheet cells, they're actually chronologically ordered with when BMW was spending their development dollars on them. So an F25 was the predecessor developmentally to the F30 or something like the F90, and the E83 was the predecessor to the E90. This means that every single E83 has electrical issues that nobody can figure out because it was the prototype to the E90's electrical system, and the F25 got a slightly bizarre looking interior that was the predecessor to the F30's interior styling. And the G01 carries some upsides and downsides with that early platform basis being the first G chassis in development, carries those all the way through to its 2024 development end. So as I said, the G01 is any X3 built between 2018 and 2024. The G02 is any X4 built between 2018 and 2025. They got one more year out of that production cycle. The F97 is the X3M, like the one sitting to my right, and the F98 is the X4M. Now, a lot of people refer to these X3Ms just as the G01 X3M because F97 is kind of confusing and doesn't really paint the whole picture. It is based on BMW G chassis technology and platforms after all. So if you hear us say G01, we're talking about any X3 built from 2018 to 2024. And if you want to get more specific than that, that's where we come in with trims and model designations. So let's go over the different models and trims that make up the X3 and X4 model. Now, ranging all the way from 30i to M competition, there's a whole family tree of vehicles underneath the G01 and G02 nomenclature. Anything from the grocery getter to something that'll pretty much dominate at a racetrack, BMW built a G01 for everybody. Or a G02 if you want to delete that squared off roofline. Starting at the 30i designation, whether it be an X3 or an X4, that will come equipped with the B48 4-cylinder, which is basically the B58 with 2 cylinders removed. Now, I've personally owned a G20 330i and I absolutely loved that engine. The fuel economy is incredible. The torque, as I said, can actually surpass that of 6 cylinders from years ago, and it's a fantastic and reliable engine for a daily driver. In fact, with a tow hitch equipped, you could even tow a boat or a race car with one. We've got tons of information on this engine, and if you want to learn more, head on over to our B48 engine guide and check out our DIYs on our G20 330i. Now here's where things get a little bit more complicated and a lot more torquey. The X3 or X4 30e is the hybrid variant of the base 30i 4-cylinder, and punching at 310 pound-feet of torque, it could easily tow a boat while getting better fuel economy in the city. While it does make more torque than the 258 pound-feet of torque from the 30i model, it actually makes the exact same horsepower at 248 horsepower, and the top end will be very similar as it's a mild hybrid setup, not a full hybrid like the new M5. Now the 30e variant is quite a bit harder to come by. They usually carry a price premium, and working on them and parts availability is going to be a little bit more challenging than something like the run-of-the-mill 4-cylinder B48 car. If you live in the inner city and you want to benefit from that stop-start functionality, having a mild hybrid, then the 30e might be one to go test drive. Now, what might seem like a very small number change on the tailgate from 30i to M40i brings with it a huge performance upgrade, and the B58 straight 6, as well as the B58 TU, or the second generation from 2020 onwards. Now, this engine is one of the greatest engines that BMW has ever built. Not only is it reliable because it's based on a diesel, the B57, but it sounds fantastic and it's super responsive and a great performance platform. We here at FCP Euro reckon it's one of the best modern performance values from BMW, and we've actually purchased our own X3 M40i to put our money where our mouth is and show you guys how to live with one and maintain it. You can find DIYs on every part of this car, even some shared with the X330i and X3M, and we've got an engine guide showing you the ins and outs of the B58 straight 6, including some of its downsides. Sorry, B58 fanboys. producing 355 or 382 horsepower depending on first or second generation, and 360-ish pound-feet of torque, also depending on which generation. This engine punches way above its weight and from a launch is probably faster than basically every single M3 sedan produced before the G80, which came out after this X3M that debuted its engine. Speaking of that X3M, that's the logical next step from the M40i, and let me tell you, it is a real M car. I know, sounds like sacrilege, go drive one. It's pretty eye-opening. Where the M40i has one fuel pump, the X3M has two. Where the M40i has one turbocharger, the X3M has two mono-scroll turbochargers. In fact, just about everything on the X3M or the X4M is double what the base car has. The brake rotors are almost twice as thick. The differential with the cooler is almost twice as tall. It even has a 3D printed cylinder head casting core in order to achieve the wicked geometries inside of the S58, and it has significantly stronger and wider connecting rods internally. It has two radiators to cool its transmission and oil, as opposed to the heat exchanger on the plastic oil filter housing on the B58, which is metal on the S58 on the M cars. BMW did a ton of work to make this a gnarly performance machine, and again, instead of G01, they go by F97 and F98 for the X3M and X4M. Producing 473 horsepower and 443 pound-feet of torque, and then 503 horsepower, again with 473 pound-feet of torque for the competition variants, the X3M has been a performance platform that has been discovered by enthusiasts over the past few years and tuned that can make upwards of 600 and 700 horsepower like the one next to me. In fact, between our X3 M40i with some simple Dyna bolt-ons and the tuned X3M sitting next to me, I'm standing in front of well over 1,000 crank horsepower of X3. Either one can be had for less than the price of a new Honda Odyssey minivan. Now, while the X3M and X4M are absolutely fantastic performance values and a great daily driver, there are a lot of reasons to like the 30i and the M40i variants over the full-fat M. Now, one of the reasons to like the 30i or M40i cars is the M Sport package, and BMW has redone how they've sold it with these cars versus prior models. Gone are the days where you could get an M Sport bumper kit but lack the brakes or the exhaust. The X3 M40i is only sold as an M Sport package with that B58, with the rowdy exhaust and the fun go fast parts. The 30i can also be had with the M Sport package, including the big brakes, and it makes a fantastic performance value if you want to get great fuel economy while looking tough and enjoying a B-road. In fact, you can even get the 30i or M40i car with adaptive dampers, which is pretty insane. You could have a car that gets 32 miles to the gallon, has a tow hitch, and has soft and sport ride and handling modes. All this goes without saying that maintaining an M40i car or a 30i car is going to cost you quite a bit less in the long run when things like the brake pads and brake rotors for the full-fat M are well over $1,000 just to do your routine maintenance. So keep that in mind when you're searching for an X3. And if you want to go fast, the M40i is a pretty fantastic performance value. Now, let's be honest, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about the wonderful performance of an X3 if it weren't for the amazing new generation of BMW engines that came out all the way from the 2 Series through to the X7. The B48 and B58 are incredible, and as I mentioned, there are engine guides on both if you want to learn the advantages and disadvantages to both engines. Just to rifle off a couple things that make these engines so good, they've completely reworked the cooling and air intake system on both, deleting a lot of things like the front mount intercooler, and the Valvetronic system has been reworked to no longer have oil squirters that can clog up and ruin your day. Gone are the days of cast crankshafts and open deck heads. Both the B48 and the B58 have closed deck heads, something that was previously only reserved for diesel BMW engines. Being based on a diesel, their connecting rods are way stronger, and their connecting rod bearings actually have a coating in them to run with 0 oil pressure from stop-start. BMW openly admitted on prior engines was causing engines to fail. Now, something that's not specific to a model or trim is the 8 HP automatic 8-speed transmission from ZF. They're fantastic transmissions, and they are standard in every single version of a G01 or the F97, F98M cars. We have service kits for every single trim, and we have a DIY showing you how to service that 8 HP, even though BMW says it's lifetime fluid. You're going to want to change it probably around 100,000 miles. So on top of the engine differences, which there are many, and they oftentimes go a lot deeper than at first glance, there's also obviously some aesthetic differences and quite a few differences when you step into the cockpit of one of these land missiles. First off, they have configurability where the non-M vehicles just have driving modes. So in a non-M car like a 30i or an M40i car, you can choose between comfort, adaptive, which is like your efficient modes, and then you have sport and sport plus. In these cars, you're pretty much always in a sporty setting, and then you can configure those individual attributes to be more or less aggressive, such as the steering, the exhaust, the drivetrain, the throttle response, the shifting. It's all configurable. And of course, lately, you may have seen these drifting around on social media and YouTube. Well, it's because they share a very similar all-wheel drive system to the F90 M5, and they have that X-Drive configurator in the iDrive, which you can code to add rear wheel drive, which is super sick. There's people sliding these things. It's really, really rowdy. On top of the configurability in the X3M and X4M, you also have hotkeys for your preferred M setup. So there's M1 and M2. You can actually configure these to have traction control and other driver aids switched off. So that way, if you are planning to get rowdy with the car and you don't want to jump into your menu and change a bunch of stuff, you have a hotkey right there on the steering wheel. In the non-Ms, you have your sport individual setting where you can customize it, but you'll still have to change traction control setting through that DSC off button. As I mentioned, there's some aesthetic differences, and while both the non-Ms and the Ms got a facelift in 2022, the Ms have stayed a little bit more aggressive for those first model years. So they got this big air intake, they have much more aggressive seats with some pretty sweet looking stitching, illuminated M logos in the seats, and a much sportier rear diffuser and a more pronounced rear exhaust, which actually has two exhaust pipes running the full length of the car, whereas the M40i has a single 3-inch and 3.5-inch downpipe. Now let's talk competition and value in this SUV egg hot hatch space. So this gets a little bit weird because BMW went full on into this SUV with the performance segment in mind, whereas other manufacturers kind of just made hot versions of cars they were already making. So cars like the GLC AMG or the Macan GTS, while they're the top dogs of their model range, they're actually more similar to an X3 M40i in horsepower, tire size, overall package, and pricing. The X3M is kind of in a league of its own, and that's why you see people compare these things to much faster and more expensive SUVs that are larger and with more luxury. Now, a common factor I've noticed amongst a lot of the fun SUVs is McPherson front suspension. Now, this comes with drawbacks from an OEM standpoint. McPherson front suspension is old school, it's what's used in the 3 Series, and it provides a lot of camber gain throughout the suspension motion, so you get that really sharp turn-in and great neutral cornering. The larger SUVs and even smaller SUVs, those use double wishbones, and so do many of the competitor cars, such as the Lexus NX, even Jeep Cherokees, stuff like the Audi options. Those are all double wishbones, so you get a very linear camber curve, and with that comes understeer. Even BMW knows about this, and on the X5M, the only real difference between a normal X5 and an X5M is they just shorten that upper wishbone to give it more camber, but that means with a standard double wishbone setup out of the box, you're not going to get as much camber and driver corner friendliness as you will with something like an X3 M40i or especially the X3M with its longer, lower control arms. So the TLDR here is that the X3 is the sportiest end of this segment of SUVs. Between the Lexus NX, the Volvo XC60, the Audi SQ5 and Q5, and the Porsche Macan, you're really not going to get anything that's as sporty and aggressive out of the box as something like an X3M, and the top dogs of those models are going to be more similar to something like an X3 M40i. Of course, when you get down to the 4-cylinder option, it really all becomes about personal preference and which one you want to maintain and get parts for. So speaking of value proposition, if you're searching for one of these, you're going to notice a drastic change in pre and post 2022 cars. Now, this is called a facelift, and in BMW lingo, people call it LCI, which BMW internally, that stands for Life Cycle Impulse, or an update to extend a chassis they spent millions developing so they can sell more of them for longer. Now, previously, this LCI is something to look out for because they'll release a new car and actually backdate a lot of the technologies and features that the old car just got done having. For example, when the F30 3 Series came out in 2012, it had incandescent headlights, something that the prior generation had ditched completely. So keep in mind when you're searching for something like a 2018 X3 that you might see a lot of options that quickly got revised and fixed and upgraded in 2019 and 2020 cars, and then totally ditched and wholesale upgraded in 2022 with the facelift. Now, a great example of this in the X3 space is something like the instrument cluster. What started out as an analog set of gauges behind a piece of darkly tinted plastic then became a fully digital set of gauges, which then became a fully digital screen, which is customizable, and you can code it to be even more performance oriented, such as the G80 M3 cluster that we've coded into our G01 M40i. Now, in 2022, they also brought updates to the center console screen, making the 10.1-inch display enlarged to 12.3 inches, and thankfully for many of us, they did not go to the full curved iDrive 8 display, which ended up having to be revised by BMW because it was so counterintuitive and difficult to use. They stuck with a lot of physical controls all the way through to the 2025 model year with the X4, and this is to be celebrated for those of us who use gloves. Now, I want to give a word of advice to those of you who are looking to purchase these cars on the used market, and specifically that 30i and M40i 4-cylinder and 6-cylinder trim. Now, for the 2020 model year, BMW introduced the second generation of both the B48 4-cylinder and the B58 6-cylinder. Not only did this update bring more power, but the engines actually differed quite a lot. And as I mentioned in our B48 engine explained video and our B58 engine explained video, BMW calls this an update. We would probably call it an entire revision of the engines. As I said, they produce more power. They also had quite a few mods for reliability, serviceability, and their general construction. Although it is important to keep in mind that for late 2019, 2020, and early 2021 models of this updated 6-cylinder, they actually received a plastic oil pump carrier, which we've dissected and is a pretty poor decision from BMW. So stick to BMW recommended oil grades if you're looking for a 2019 through early 2021 production M40i. All of this is why you'll see a price hike on the 2020 Plus cars, because on paper they make more power and they have a little bit better reliability, and some of the systems under the skin were updated to suit. So now that you're on the right track for which G01 or G02 you want to buy, let's talk about some of the major packages and the must-have equipment that comes with them. Now, the first package I want to mention is a very common package that you'll see listed on tons of websites as the premium package. This came with surround view, which is super helpful, and park assist plus, which, while it is really cool that the car can park itself, this package isn't particularly helpful if you live near a busy city, because people will generally be honking at you while you're waiting for your Park Assist Plus to tell you how you're going to park. Something that is useful, however, is Driving Assistant Professional, and particularly in that package, Traffic Jam Assistant. I had this on my G12 7 Series, which is where these cars draw their technology from, and it's basically fully autonomous driving at slow speeds in traffic jams, so you can take your feet off the pedals, take your hands off the steering wheel, and let the thing do the traffic jam for you. Awesome feature. Driving Assistant also includes radar cruise, which if you live somewhere like the Midwest with huge stretches of straight highways, that can be really useful. Be sure to look for those buttons on the steering wheel that allow you to switch for distance control on radar cruise. As we mentioned earlier in the video, the technology and feature gap between the smaller SUVs and the big boys is starting to get narrowed up, and one of the packages that allows you to do that is the Executive package. This comes with heated front and rear seats and the steering wheel, the heads-up display, which in our case we've coded to have M view on. It's the race pack style tachometer, super sweet, as well as Park Assist Plus, which again allows the car to park itself. On top of these packages, there's additional packages you can get, such as the Harman Kardon stereo, which is definitely a worthwhile upgrade, although BMW isn't really shipping these cars anymore with terrible audio systems like they used to. The base audio is pretty decent and definitely livable. Another option that people oftentimes check on these cars, much more so than prior generations, is adaptive suspension, which, just like the M cars, will allow you to adjust your suspension damping firmness for different road conditions. Now, it's important to keep in mind that replacing these dampers is much more expensive. So if you're looking at a car in the 80 to 100,000 mile range, keep that in mind. If it has EDC, you'll probably need to fork out the big bucks or find some used units in order to replace those dampers and make sure they work properly. And finally, there is the Ultimate package, which includes a lot of what I've already mentioned. You've got Drive Assist Plus, Ambient Air, which has fragrances in the HVAC. I had this in my 7 Series and absolutely loved it. That also includes the Harman Kardon stereo, adjustable reclining heated rear seats. This is an X3. And gesture control from the 7 Series. In fact, if you don't believe me when I say this is based on a 5 and 7 Series, check out where that gesture control is positioned. The cameras and sensors for it are in the identical part number to what's in a 5 and 7 Series. Now, an option that is probably one to skip is the wireless charging. It's very overhyped. All it really does is overheat your phone, especially if you have a thick, practical phone case on your phone. It'll space that phone away from the wireless charging coil and slower the charging rate even more. If you're a lunatic who has no case on your phone, be my guest, find that wireless charging option. Now, a little bonus section I want to include here that I think will help many G01 prospective buyers and owners is what we've done with our X3 M40i. As these cars both sit here behind me, they're both about the same amount of money, and I think going forward, similar to a 335i versus an M3, you can get either a 335i and do some tasteful mods and some much needed maintenance to it, or get a stock M3 for about the same amount of money. So I want to run through what we've done and how it stacks up to the X3M. Starting off with maintenance, we started with the most important bits of maintenance, which on these cars is the oil filter housing. That's true for both the M40i and the 30i. Now, on the S58 equipped X3M and X4M, that oil filter housing is aluminum produced by Hengst from the factory. However, it does have gaskets that will fail over time, just a lot further down the road, probably around 150,000 miles or so. So we have peace of mind on our 81,000 mile X3 that that's done and over with. On top of that, we refreshed the cooling system, as well as refreshing a few mechanical bits, such as the wheel bearings and the transmission fluid. Also, on BMW SUVs, it's notorious for the front tension struts to go bad, especially with large wheels. So we did that on our X3 to quell any unnecessary vibration and hardness and knocks coming from the front suspension. That all costs around $3,000 to $5,000 for all that listed maintenance, and we're now still about $10,000-ish behind the price of getting into an X3M. For that money, aside from our gorgeous BBS LMs, we've got the whole suite of dyno parts on this car, the intake, the turbo inlet, the tuner, and we've done KW coilovers to lower the car and give it a much more planted ride and adjustable ride height. Now, at this point, we're pretty much right at the price of an entry-level, fairly worn-out X3M. Going any further, well, we put BBS LMs on the car, which of course aren't cheap, but they certainly elevate how the car looks, and we chose to update this 2020 car with bumpers from a 2022. Part of the rear fascia also, you'll notice that Dynon exhaust, which makes the car sound fantastic. And I actually think the B58 has a leg up on this one. Sounds quite a bit smoother and more traditional BMW than the S58. We've also, to complete the package on our X3 M40i, upgraded the braking system. Now, it might seem like you would just take the X3M brakes and put them on the X3 M40i or a 30i car, but we've gone a step further. BMW, when they released this, did not include the most sophisticated braking system. In fact, this actually has a 4-piston caliper that is identical in its mechanics to the one that comes on the 4-cylinder and 6-cylinder M Sport cars. It has a very small brake pad about this big, and the rest of the caliper is purely for aesthetics. we went ahead and threw the X5M front rotors on this car, as well as the X3M rear rotors. The X5M, of course, shares the same front rotors. And then we threw the front 6-piston caliper on it from the F90 M5 or the F95 X5M. So between buying this car, doing the basic maintenance, going a step beyond to ensure it's future-proof, and then doing mods for braking and handling and some aesthetic improvements, we're now at the same amount of money that you can get into an X3M. I'll leave it up to you which one you think looks better, but personally, I'd rather go on a road trip to the Tail of the Dragon in this car rather than this car. I have a feeling these cars are going to age pretty well, and I think the M40i and X3M specifically are going to retain their value pretty well compared to the 4-cylinder variants, all because of that wonderful 3-liter straight six. So now that you know where the G01 X3 lies in its lineage, what makes it so special as a BMW, and what it takes and where you can go to find out how to maintain and own one, you can see why the G01 has become such an appealing platform. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe and like this video, and please leave us a comment if we missed anything. We love learning more about these cars. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.